and welcome to today's deep dive. We are diving into the fascinating world of Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
Oh, great pick.
It's one of those books, you pick up thinking, okay, personal finance, let's do this. But it's so much more than just your typical advice on budgeting and investing.
Right, right. It's not about like which stocks to pick or anything like that.
Exactly. It's more about the stories we tell ourselves about money, right?
Yeah.
Like why we make the decisions we do, even when they might not always seem rational.
Yeah, it's funny because we often think of money as this like purely logical thing,
Yeah.
but Housel really gets at the psychology of it all. The emotions, the biases, the completely irrational things we do with money.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really struck me early on was his point about compounding. We hear it all the time, right? Compounding is magic. It's the eighth wonder of the world.
Right.
But he uses this example with Warren Buffett
Okay.
that just drives it home.
Okay.
He says, imagine if Buffett had started investing just a few years later, like in his late 20s instead of his early teens, his net worth today
Yeah.
would be 99.9% lower.
Wow.
99.9% lower.
It's astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, just a few years difference.
That's a few years, and it really underscores that whole idea of time in the market being more important than time in the market.
Yeah.
Because it's not about making these like brilliant short-term bets.
Yeah.
It's that consistency over decades.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so difficult, right? Because we hit one goal, we feel good, and then instantly we're like, okay, what's next? What's bigger? What's better?
It's that hedonic treadmill. You just keep running and running, and you never quite get there.
And he says one of the hardest things to do is to actually get the goalpost to stop moving.
Oh, I love that.
And I'm as guilty of this as anyone.
Of course, we all are.
I'm constantly like, okay, I hit that goal, but now I need to aim for this. And it's this never-ending cycle.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
It is. And what I found interesting is he doesn't say we need to be like hyper-rational robots about our finances either.
Right.
He says aiming to be pretty reasonable
Pretty reasonable. I like that.
is more realistic and sustainable in the long run.
It's more human.
And he tells this fascinating story
Yeah.
about this doctor,
Okay.
Dr. Julius Wagner-Jareg,
Wagner Jarek. Okay.
and he treated syphilis
Oh, wow.
with malaria.
Oh.
So he would give his patients malaria
Oh, my.
in the hopes that it would cure their syphilis, which sounds crazy.
Sounds a little counterintuitive.
It sounds insane, but it actually worked.
It did work. He won a Nobel Prize, didn't he?
He did. He won a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that sometimes our intuition,
Yeah.
our gut feeling, is telling us something that the pure logic might not.
Right. Right. Sometimes the best decisions aren't purely data-driven.
Exactly.
You have to factor in some of that human element.
Yeah. So how does this tie back to investing?
Well, it reminds me of that old saying, the best investors are both analytical and intuitive.
Uh-huh.
They can look at the numbers, crunch at the data, but they also know when to trust their gut.
It's like a balance.
Exactly. They've seen patterns, they've experienced market cycles, and they can sometimes sense when something is off or when a contrarian approach might be the right move.
It's like they have that sixth sense.
Exactly. And that's not to say you should just go with your gut all the time.
Right.
But there's a value in recognizing that human element, even in the world of finance.
And speaking of that human element, Housel dives deep into the stories we tell ourselves about money.
Oh, yeah.
And how those narratives can sometimes lead us astray. It's like we get so caught up in our own experiences,
Right? Like our own personal narratives become our own financial gospel truth.
And he even calls it the end of history illusion.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
It's this idea that we look back at our lives and think, well, this is how it is now, so this is how it'll always be.
Right, right. We extrapolate from a very limited data set, which is essentially just our own life experience.
And it can work both ways, right? It's like that old Mark Twain quote.
Yeah.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
But we fall into this trap of assuming it's just going to be a straight line from here on out.
Absolutely. And Housel gives that example
Yeah.
of the woman celebrating Armistice Day, thinking it meant the end of all wars.
Oh, yeah. So tragic.
Because she had lived through World War I and just assumed that was it,
We learned our lesson. We're good now.
Right. And it highlights how this illusion can make us blind to both the positive and negative possibilities that lie ahead.
It's so true. And it's not just about these big world events either, right? Think about how we approach investing.
Oh, absolutely.
We see a stock go up for a year and we're like, I'm going to be rich.
Right.
We extrapolate.
This is it. This is the one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we create these narratives in our heads
Yes.
to try and make sense of a very complex and uncertain world.
It's like my 1-year-old daughter trying to figure out how to work the TV remote.
Right.
She's pushing buttons, but there's no like real understanding of the why behind it.
Yeah, and it's almost endearing in a child.
It is. She's cute.
But when we do it with our finances,
Yeah.
it can have real consequences.
Totally. And this whole idea of storytelling ties into his point about pessimism.
Oh, yeah.
Pessimism sounding so smart.
It sounds very sophisticated, doesn't
It
it?
does. It's like, oh, you're so negative, you must really know what's going on.
You're a realist.
But he argues that historically,
Yeah?
optimism has actually been the better bet.
More often than not.
More often than not, yeah.
It's that whole idea of betting against human ingenuity and resilience.
Think about 2008,
Yeah?
you know? Everyone thought the world was ending.
Right. It felt like it at the time.
It did, and here we are.
And here we are.
Still kicking.
Still going. Yeah.
And this isn't to say, like,
Hmm.
throw caution to the wind and just be blindly optimistic.
Exactly. It's not about ignoring risks.
Right.
It's about understanding that things change. Markets adapt. Humans are incredibly resourceful.
So how do we find that balance, then,
Right.
between acknowledging the risks, but also not getting swept up in the doom and gloom?
Well, I think a big part of it is recognizing that our own experiences are just that. They're our own.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily predictive of the future, and they don't tell the whole story.
And this is where he starts to give more of his practical advice, right?
Yeah, he offers a framework
Okay.
for how to navigate this messy world of money and psychology.
Okay, I like it.
All right.
So what's step one?
Willie says a good place to start is acknowledging that none of us are perfect.
Oh, tell me something I don't know.
Right. We're all going to make mistakes, and we need to build in room for error into our financial plans.
Room for error.
Yes.
That's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way.
It's like that margin of safety that smart investors build into their portfolios.
Okay, give me an example.
Like those professional blackjack card counters.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
They know they're going to make wrong calls. Sometimes it's inevitable,
Right.
but they have a system in place
Yeah.
to manage those risks and to come out ahead in the long run.
So it's like having a financial cushion, even if it means maybe sacrificing a bit of potential return in the short term.
Exactly. Because sometimes the best investment you can make is in peace of mind,
Oh, I like that.
knowing that you have a buffer to weather the storms.
And I'm thinking about this now, and it really changes how I view my emergency fund.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just lazy money sitting there.
It's your safety net.
It's peace of mind. It's freedom.
Exactly. And that ties into another one of Housel's big ideas. Wealth is what you don't see.
Oh, yeah, that one really stuck with me. He tells that story about,
The valet, right?
yes, the valet who had all these wealthy clients.
Driving fancy cars, wearing expensive clothes.
And he was flaunting his own cash
Yeah, but it turned out he was in debt up to his eyeballs.
because he was spending everything he made trying to keep up appearances.
Right. He had no real wealth to fall back on.
Because true wealth isn't about what you spend, it's about what you keep.
It's about having options. It's about having the financial security to live life on your own terms.
It's like having all the fancy stuff but no actual control.
Exactly. And that control, that freedom, often comes from having control over your time, which Housel argues is maybe the most valuable thing money can buy.
Oh, 100%. It's funny because I was thinking about this the other day. I remember when I first graduated, I got this job at a tech startup. And on paper, it was amazing, high salary, stock options, the whole 9 yards. But the reality was I was working constantly, like all the time. I was glued to my phone, always on call. And eventually, I just burned out.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, though, right?
Yeah,
Especially early in your career when you're ambitious and you want to prove yourself.
totally. And it's not like the money wasn't great, but I realized I was trading my time, my freedom for it. And it just wasn't worth it. It made me rethink my whole definition of success,
Yeah. Absolutely. Housel really challenges us to define what matters most to us, right? Because that definition of success, it's different for everyone. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, and what I love is how he emphasizes that money is just a tool, right? It's not inherently good or bad. It's all about how we use it to build the life we want.
And that's what makes the psychology of money so powerful. It's not just about managing your money. It's about managing your life, your psychology, your relationship with this thing we call money.
It really is a different way of thinking about personal finance. It's not just about the numbers. It's about the why behind the numbers, the emotions, the stories we tell ourselves.
It's about understanding your own personal psychology and using that knowledge to make decisions that align with your values and your goals.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that there's no right or wrong answer, right? What works for one person might not work for another.
It's about finding what works for you, what aligns with your risk tolerance, your goals, your dreams, all of it.
Absolutely. So as you reflect on these stories from the psychology of money, ask yourself, what's your definition of wealth? Is it about financial security? Is it about freedom and flexibility? Is it about leaving a legacy? Whatever it is, make sure your money is working for you, not the other way around. And on that note, that's a wrap for today's deep dive into the psychology of money. Thanks for joining us.